Recording in progress.
Today we're going to learn Yoma Daf Nun Hey. Today it's the Daf for Shabbat, and we are going to start at the bottom of Nun Dalet Amud with a quote from the Mishnah. Natalat Adam mimishim emarespo. So the Kohen Gadol takes the blood from the person who was holding it so that it didn't congeal. And then it said that he does echad lemala ve'echad lemata. He sprinkles one above and seven below. We're going to get into that today. And he's not supposed to mitkaven lahazot. Lo lamala v'lo lamata. He's not supposed to do it in an intentional way, ela kimatzlif, but like a matzlif. So the Gemara says, "My kimatzlif." What is that? Machve Rav Yehudi showed everybody kimin nagdina, like one who whips. Now it's very nice that he showed everybody. The problem is they don't provide a diagram, and because of that, the commentaries disagree about what exactly. In what way is this similar to lashes? So some people say, Rashi says, for example, that when you do lashes, you start from the ketefayim, from the shoulders, and you go down. So likewise here, he sprinkled, and then each one was a little bit lower than the previous. Some people say it's that when you go to do it, you lift up a little bit first, and then you do it. So same thing he did with his finger, he lifted it up, and then he would do the sprinkling. Some people say that it's, what's the third explanation I saw? Right, that you don't, when you whip someone, you don't have a particular spot where you're looking to get to. Likewise here, there's no target. It's not like you have to land it exactly on a particular place. But you would do it like a minagdina. So Tana, kishuhu mazeh, eino mazeh ala kaporet, ela kineged ovya shel kaporet. For this, we need a picture. What exactly is the kaporet? So there's the aron. Okay, this is a picture of the aron. And at the top here, there was a gold board that sat on top of the aron, and you see this very pretty edging around the edges of it. So the kaporet was covered with gold, and so was this edging around it. And that whole piece that goes all around on the top of the aron is the kaporet. This is actually a picture of the Kohen Gadol sprinkling the blood. You see he has a little cup with the blood in it, and there he is sprinkling it towards the kaporet. We're going to see where we get that it's towards the kaporet and not on the kaporet. So he doesn't do it on, he does it toward, keneged ovya, toward the thickness of the thickness of the kaporet, okay, which basically means we're just sort of angling toward it, but not actually on it. It actually ends up going on the floor, okay? Kishuhu mazeh, lamala, when he does the lamala, so again, he does one above, and then seven below. So now I'm going to pull up the pictures. So here he goes and he's going to sprinkle. So when he does the lamala, the one above, mitzadeg yado lamata, his hand, it goes downward, which means basically the back of his hand is facing down, which means his palm is face up. And that's how he does the lamala, up like this. Okay, you see in the picture 128. When he does the ones lamata, mitzadeg yado lamala. So likewise, his hand, now the back of his hand is facing up, his hand, the palm of his hand is facing down, and again, he's using his finger, and he sprinkles downward. Where do we learn this from? So they say, we're going to learn it from these verses. Before we read inside how he's going to learn it, I'm going to read you two of these verses that we're going to darshan and raise all the issues that they're going to raise about these verses in the beginning so that you have it understood. In the description of the Kohen Gadol, we always go back to chapter 16 of Leviticus, of Vayikra, Pasuk Yud Daled and Tet Vav. Okay, two psukim one after the other. Yud Daled is talking about the blood of the bull, the first one he takes. V'lakach midam apal, he takes from the blood of the bull. V'hiza be'etzba'o, and he sprinkles with his finger, that's what we saw with the finger, al pinei hakaporet kedma, on the face or the surface of the kaporet, which sounds actually like on the kaporet, kedma, from the east, v'lifnei kaporet yazeh sheva pami, and then before the kaporet, in other words, the ala kaporet is the first, that's the lamala. Then lifnei kaporet, before it, which sounds like before, not actually reaching it, he will sprinkle, which by the way, we're going to darshan later. He doesn't need to say sprinkle. We already said sprinkle earlier in the verse. It said, right? Bihiza be'etzba'o pnei kaporet. And then it says, and before the kaporet, yazeh sheva pami, he'll sprinkle 7 times. Now notice very particularly that it didn't say how many times the first time. It just said he'll sprinkle with his finger on the face of the kaporet, but it didn't say how many times. Then it says, and before the kaporet yazeh sheva pamim, I'll sprinkle 7 times, min adam be'etzba'o, from the blood on his finger. Now, the next verse says, after he finishes that, v'shachat et se'ir chatat asher la'am, he now takes the goat that's for the nation. Vehevi et amo al mibeit laparochet. This isn't important for us. I'm going to go to the end. V'asa et amo kasher asa ledam hapal. He does the exact same thing with the blood that he did with the blood of the bull. Now, you could have stopped the pasuk there. We know. Sprinkle up. We don't really know how many, but you sprinkle up. Then you sprinkle down 7 times. But now it says, V'hizauto ala kaporet v'lifnei kaporet. It says almost the same thing with some minor variations, which are going to be very important. So it says he sprinkles it. It, they assume, means 1 time, okay? Because it's singular instead of otam, the sprinklings, right? You sprinkle it once, ala kaporet, in front of the kaporet, which is, again, on the kaporet, which is the up one. And then v'lifnei kaporet, and before the kaporet. But it doesn't say how many times before the kaporet. So, okay, it doesn't say 7 times there at all. So now we're going to start darshaning. If you didn't get everything, it's fine. We're going to go through and now raise some issues. This is where we get it from, that it's not actually on the kaporet. None of them are done on the kaporet, even though it sounds like that from a simple reading. Amalka, the pasuk says, first we're reading the one we read first, the par. We're reading the se'ir, the goat, the second verse. V'hizauto ala kaporet v'lifnei kaporet. Why did it have to say, after it just said, right? Lo yomar lamata b'se'ir de lo tzarich tigamar mimata depal. You didn't need it to say how many sprinklings you do downward on the se'ir, because it was already said about the par that you do it 7 times. And it said in the verse, do for the se'ir just like you did by the par. So maybe we need the one that goes up, because by the se'ir it tells you how many, but it doesn't say it by the par. But you don't need the one that says the how many times to do it down. So digamar mata depal, you can learn it from the bull. Lama ne'amar, so why was it said? La'akushe al lilifnei. So now, again, what's unnecessary for it to have said lifnei kaporet? Because ala kaporet we needed to say he's auto 1 time, lamala. But lamata, lifnei kaporet wasn't necessary. So it must be that lifnei is extra. And what's it there to teach you? To make a comparison between lifnei and al, that lifnei can teach you about al. The one that's extra is teaching about the one that was necessary. Ma lifnei de lav al, just like before the kaporet is not on top of the kaporet. Af al de lav al, even on the kaporet is actually not on the kaporet. It just means do it up rather than down. So now the Gemara suggests, though, wait a minute. Adrabah, you could say the exact reverse. Ma lifnei de lav al, af al de lav al. Why don't you say, just like lifnei kaporet is not, sorry, I read the wrong thing. Erase that. Adrabah. Lo yomar lamala bepar. I accidentally went behind the line. Lo yomar lamala bepar de lo tzarich. You don't need to say lamala bepar. There's no point. Now, what are we doing? We're looking at, until now we've been looking at, well, it says the se'ir is done like the par. And the par we know is 7 times down, but we don't know how many times up. We know by the se'ir how many times up, we don't know how many times down. So let's just reverse this whole thing and say, actually, let's look at the par and say that the lemata b'par was necessary to teach you 7 down, but the al by the par was not necessary at all. Why was it not necessary? Because the al b'se'ir tells you more. It tells you how many times, it tells you 1. And it says the se'ir is done just like the par. So if the se'ir is 1 lamala, then obviously the par will be 1 lamala. So why don't you say that the al by the par is unnecessary? Now, if you say the al by the par is unnecessary, then you're going to come to the opposite conclusion, because you're going to say, since you can learn the gamar mimala de se'ir, you learn it from the up of the se'ir, which is 1. So lama ne'amal. So why is the al said? La kushe lifnei la al. So again, if the al is the extra unnecessary one, it must be that al is teaching you about lifnei, and ma al mamash af lifnei al mamash. Just like al means actually on the kaporet, because that's a simple reading of on. Therefore, even lifnei before the kaporet means down, but down on the kaporet. Okay, so Haimai, which one is it? To which the Gemara says, well, if you say the one going down on the se'ir, the one about the se'ir is the extra one that's unnecessary, and lamala depal is also extra. Well, we have something else to learn from that verse. You can say, Lamala de par me baile lechiditana de Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. The lamala of the par is needed. It's true, it's also unnecessary because you have the lamala of the seir and you can learn it from there that it's only one time. But it's going to teach you something else. Notice there's some words there that don't appear by the seir. It said, if you remember, Hizab etzba'o pnei kaporet kedma, on the face of the kaporet, which it doesn't say by the seir the word pnei, and it says kedma, east. So here's his drasha. The Tana de Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. In the house of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, they taught this braita. Al pnei kaporet kedma ze bana av. This teaches there's a paradigm for all situations. Kol makom shenemar pnei eino ela kadim. Anytime it says pnei, it means east. Okay, from the east. So I'll give you an example. Where else would this be relevant? In our chapter about the Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippur, the second verse says, Moshe says, Hashem says to Moshe, speak to Aaron, your brother. Ve'al yavo b'chol et el kodesh. You can't always go whenever you want into Kodesh Kodeshim. Mibeit la parochet el pnei kaporet asher al Aaron v'lo yamut. Because if you do, you will die. Now, what does it say there? You can't go el pnei kaporet. That means you can't enter from the east. If you enter from the east, you will die. But it sounds like if you enter from the sides, you don't actually get the death penalty. That's one of the things that people learn from this verse. Okay, in any case, now we're going to go on and say, just one second. Okay. So therefore, since the verse by par could be used, it's true it's unnecessary, but there's a different drasha we get from it. Therefore, we'd rather say that for our purposes, it's the drasha about the seir. But ela iamart, if you try to say lemala de par la akushe, that it's the one that's by par is the one that we learn from, and then we're going to learn that everything is done actually on the kaporet because the al is extra. Al teaches you to lifnei, and then once we learn it by the par, we're going to learn it to the seir. Lemata de seir lemayata, but still then the lemata of the seir, the 7 sprinklings, is totally unnecessary because we already know that you're supposed to sprinkle it downward 7 times from the par. So that verse is totally, that lifnei kaporet words, those are totally unnecessary. And we don't have any drasha that we can learn from it. So therefore, it must be the first way we read it, which then concludes that you don't do the sprinklings on the kaporet, but actually in front of the kaporet, which means they end up basically on the floor. Tanu Rabbanit, brighter reads. More drashot on those verses. V'yizau to'ala kaporet v'lifnei kaporet. That's again the verse from the seir. Lamanu kama lamala b'seir echat. Lamata b'seir eini yodea kama. Right. So again, this is the same thing we saw before. Now we're going to get into more details about this. You see by the seir, it says oto. That means 1. That's 1 above. But we don't know how many below. It doesn't tell us. So hareini done. We can make a logical argument. But then we're going to suggest logic in 2 different ways. Right. There's blood that you sprinkle downward for the par blood, and there's blood that you sprinkle downward for the seir blood, right? The goat and the bull. Just like the bull is sheva 7 times, is sheva. So therefore the seir is exactly the same. As we said, you do the same thing. It must be the same number. Or possibly you could suggest a different way of reading it. Why don't we learn? It says you should sprinkle oto, it, ala kaporet v'lifnei kaporet. Maybe it refers to both. Just like the seir lamala is 1, maybe the seir lamata is also 1. And then you would get to a different conclusion. So what does the Gemara say? Nireh lemidome. Let's see to which one is it more similar. Now again, we're going to bring 2 sides. Danim mata mimata ve'in danim mata mimala. We'll learn downward sprinkling from downward sprinkling, and not downward sprinkling from upward sprinkling. Or adraba, danim gufo mi gufo ve'in danim gufo me alma. We learned goat from goat and not goat from bull. That's also pretty logical. So Talmud Lomar, we're going to learn it from this verse. It says, "Pa'asad damo ka'asher asa ledama pav." That was by the goat blood. It says the blood is done just like it is done for dama pav. She'ein Talmud Lomar ka'asher asa. Could have just said asad damo. It didn't have to say like it does for the dama par, because the verse already kind of said that you do it ala kaporet v'lifnei kaporet. So therefore, ma Talmud Lomar ka'asher asa. So what's that coming to teach you? Everything you do about it is the same as for the bull. So therefore, the amount of down is going to be learned out from the bull exactly. Just like downward, the bull, you sprinkle 7 times. Likewise by the goat. Okay, so that resolved how much lamata, we've dealt with that. 7 by the par, we're going to learn from there 7 to the goat. But when it comes to the upward one, by the bull, we don't know how many. Again, we're going to say the same thing, but the reverse, right? The reverse direction. Right? It talks about blood sprinkled upward on the seir. It talks about blood sprinkled upward on the par. Just like there, it's clear it's 1. Also upward with the bull, it's 1. Or maybe it's the opposite logic. We saw how much blood you're supposed to sprinkle downward by the bull, and we didn't see how much blood you're supposed to sprinkle upward. But they're mentioned right next to each other. There's do it ala kaporet and do it lifnei kaporet. So since the downward ones are 7, maybe the upward ones should also be 7. So again, do you learn it from the goat, or do you learn it from itself, from the other bull sprinkling? Again, the same logic. Let's see to what is it more similar. Do we say dani mala mimala? We learn up from up. Ve'ein dani mala mimata, and we don't learn up from down. Or adraba, maybe the opposite. Danim gufo me gufo, ve'ein danim gufo me alma. Maybe you learn bull from bull and not from goat. Talmud lamal. Again, we're going to have the same verse that proves it. Asa damo kasher asa. Shein Talmud lamal kasher asa. There's no reason to say just like you did it. Uma Talmud lamar kasher asa. So why is it saying that? Shiur kol hasiotav shavot. Every time he does it, it should be the same. Kashem shalamata bepar sheva, kach lamata b'seir sheva. Just like you do 7 downward by the par, you do 7 downward by the goat. Ukshem shalamala b'seir achad, kach lamala bepar achad. Excuse me. And just like when you sprinkle them upward in the goat, you do 1. Likewise, by the bull, you do 1 upward. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the count. This you should be familiar with from the Avodat Yom Kippurim in Shul and the davening. We sing out, right? 1, 1 and 1, 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 1 and 4. What it's doing. Every time you sprinkle up 1 and you say 1. Then you sprinkle down 7. The Kohen Gadol sprinkles down 7. And when he says 7, each time he mentions the one he did up and then which one he's up to when he goes down. So, Tanu Rabbanit. That's how he counts. 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 1, 6, 1, 7, as he sprinkles his 7 sprinklings down. Tivrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, achat v'achat, so far the same. 2 v'achat, 3 v'achat, 4 v'achat, 5 v'achat, 6 v'achat, 7 v'achat. Each time he mentions it, he does the reverse order. He mentions how many he's sprinkling down, and then he mentions the one he sprinkled up. So he sprinkles down 1, he says 1, and the one I sprinkled up. Then he sprinkles down 2, he says 2 and 1, 3 and 1. He doesn't sprinkle up. He just counts that, he mentions I sprinkled up. So they're going to say, v'lo pligi, marki atre u'marki atre. They really don't disagree. It's just a matter of style. Which one do you mention first? But all of them basically mention the one that was up, even though he's not sprinkling that now. So now the Gemara says, everyone agrees that you're supposed to mention the one that went up every time you sprinkle downward. My timer, what's the reason for this? So Rabbi Elazar Amar, we want to make sure that you're focusing on your counting and the Kohen Gadol, he doesn't make any mistakes. I was thinking, sometimes we used to play this game when we were little. I don't know if you did this, but we used to count. When we would count numbers, like for tag or whatever it might be, we count 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. It's a way of lengthening the count and focusing more on it. It's a way to really be focused on it so that you don't forget. That's one reading of it. Another is that since you do 1 up and 7 down, there's a concern that you might do 1 up and then you start your 7 down, but you continue with number 2 because you've already done 1. And now you do 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you end up only doing 6 because you don't count 1 twice. So that's why we do 1, finish with that. And then all the other 7 have a special count, 1 and 1, or 1 and 2, or 2 and 1, or whatever it is. But to remember that we're counting a separate count. Those are 2 different explanations of what it means, shelo yit'ed. We're concerned he's going to make a mistake. Rabbi Yochanan gives a different reason. Amar kra, it's from the pasuk directly. It says, v'lifnei kaporet yazeh. You remember I showed you in that verse. It started off, v'lakach midam apal, v'hiza be'etzba'o al pnei kaporet kedma, v'lifnei kaporet yazeh. The verb to sprinkle is twice in that verse. You could say it was mentioned first, the first sprinkling, the second sprinkling, but it's really not necessary to mention it. The second time we know the subject is sprinkling. So he says, you don't need that. It shows that you have to count that haza'ah, you have to mention another sprinkling when you do the ones down, and that's the one that was up. My benai, what's the difference whether you say it's from a verse or it's maybe he'll make a mistake? What if you didn't count in this special way and you just did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? You didn't make any mistakes. Is that okay? According to the first interpretation, it's fine, because the whole reason you had to count this way was to prevent mistakes. According to the second interpretation, you did it because the Torah said you have to do it. Then you're going to have to redo the count or the sprinkling. In the Mishnah, it said first you put the dama par on the stand that was made of gold. Then you put the dama seir on a second one, to which Rabbi Yehuda said, no, there's really only one. If you remember, what Rabbi Yehuda said in the Mishnah was, there's only one. Just finding it. Lo hayasham ela kan echad bilvad, natal damapal v'hiniach dama seir. So what do? Since there's only one, you take off the damapal and you put on the dama seir on that stand. Okay, that's what you do. You remove one and put the other one on. So basically, we have this machloket where there are 2 stands or only 1 stand there in the temple. Okay. 1 second. I just want to see one thing. Okay. Right. It's a little stand. Okay. Now, let's try to understand Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Tanan Hatam, we're going to bring in some other opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in a different place where he disagrees with Tanakama about something else. And we learned this in Masachet Shkalim. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Lo hayu shafarot l'kinei chova mipnei hata'arovot. Okay, so to understand this, let's look at the Mishnah in Shkalim. The Mishnah in Shkalim says, chapter 6, halacha dalid, Mishnah dalid, it says, Shloshasar shofarot hayu b'mikdash. Remember, there were these 13 shofarot in the mikdash. Okay, these were used. If you didn't learn Shkalim, I'll explain it to you. If you did, this is good review. There were 13 of these shofarot. They were in the shape of a shofar. They weren't shofarot. They were shofar-shaped kupot, basically, like stucco boxes. Okay, and katuv alehen, and this is what it said on them. You can see from the picture that it says different things on them, right? Let's see if we can zoom in on this. No, it's not working. Okay, but it would be zoom. Anyway, here we go. Okay, so it says eitzim, levona. You see that, all these different things. Okay, so now let's go back to Okay. There were these 13 shofarot, and it said on them taklin chadatin, taklin atikin, new shkalim, old shkalim, kinim. Okay, these are the important ones. Kinim, which were pairs of birds, and which are usually what you bring, these pairs of birds, the zav, the zava, the oled, all these requirements you have to bring. One for ola, one for chatat, one's a sin offering, and one's a burnt offering. Vigozle ola, which they interpret to mean birds that you bring for voluntary offerings. So the first is for obligatory, and the second is for voluntary. But then the Mishnah continued. I'm not going to read all the others. That we'll actually see them soon in the Gemara. The Mishnah explained that according to Rabbi Yehuda, kinim meant torim, and gozle ola or bnei yona, and kulam olot. These are different types of birds. According to Tanakama, they could pick any kind of birds, didn't matter. According to, and they were for chovah, for obligatory purposes, the kinim. According to Rabbi Yehuda, no. These are all for voluntary offerings. None of them are for obligatory offerings. And they're all for koran ola, burnt offerings. None of them are for sin offerings. So now the question is why? So Rabbi Yehuda Omer, here I'm going to read Rabbi Yehuda's, what he says. Lo hayu shafarot l'kinei chova mipnei ta'arovot. We're worried about money mixing together, and because of that, you can't have anything that's for obligatory offerings. So my mipnei ta'arovot, what does this mean? So first, we're going to bring one interpretation, which eventually we're going to reject. But first, we're going to think that it connects with our Mishnah. We're worried that you're going to mix obligatory and voluntary. You won't know which money was for which, and it's a problem, right? You might get confused. Tanakama had it that there's one that's called kinim, which is obligations, and the one next to it is gozlei olah, which are for voluntary, and you might confuse the two. To which why don't we just have the two that they say? People won't get confused if you write on it. If you write, everyone will know. So Rabbi Yehuda, late must be, he thinks that writing doesn't work. You can't write on them. I know it's something you can't write. It's not like it's Shabbat. You're not allowed to write. It's that Rashi says, we can't rely on that. Why? I'm on the first Rashi of the Amud Bet. Sometimes people just don't read what's written. Okay, I'll give you some good examples. You send a WhatsApp to someone. You assume they read it, right? Especially if the checks are blue, right? You assume for sure they read it. If I sent it, I wrote it, they read it, it must be clear. First of all, sometimes your kids are playing with your phone and it shows up blue because your kid was looking at it and you obviously didn't read it. Had a huge mess up once where that happened. My daughter was going to a therapist, and my younger daughter, and I left her. She went in on her own, and I hadn't looked at my messages because as my daughter had looked at the messages, she was playing with my phone, and half an hour passes by, and I noticed my phone, and I noticed that the therapist had written me a few hours earlier, is it okay if we switch the time? And she doesn't come this time. And I didn't write anything because I didn't see it, but my daughter wrote yes. And it ended up, she sat there waiting outside the door for half an hour by herself. She didn't know what was going on. And the therapist had no idea she was outside the room because she didn't know the time had changed. I didn't know the time had changed. The therapist thought that we all knew. So it's a little bit tricky when somebody reads something and you assume somebody read it and they don't always actually read it. So in any case, what happened? So it says now, he says, we don't rely on the fact that people have read things, right? Or how many times do you read an email and you just don't read it carefully, or you read a WhatsApp? We read things so fast that you miss half of what's in it often. It's the biggest problem nowadays. People are so distracted. They don't really read everything. So you can't assume that people read. By the way, there's a whole debate here. Who are we worried is going to get confused? The Kohen, he's going to take the money from the wrong place and he's going to spend it incorrectly. Or is it the person who puts it in the kuppah that they're not going to pay attention and they're going to put it in the wrong one? Which is an interesting nafkamina. Are you worried about Kohanim? Do you think Kohanim might be very careful, but the average person won't be so careful? Or are you even worried about Kohanim? They're also people who make mistakes. So in any case, it seems Rabbi Yehuda doesn't think that writing is effective. So ditnan, and now we're going to see, and we can prove it from our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda omer, lo hayasham ela kan echad bilvad. Why was there only one stand? Because trei my time halo. Why don't you have two? Mishum de machalfe v'ne'avid trei. In other words, what's the problem? We're worried you're going to confuse them. You do the dam of the par before you do the dam of the seir before the par. You've messed up the avoda. Remember, everything has to be done in this particular order. So why don't we just write pal seir? That would make it very clear. But Ella Rabbi Yehuda late lektiva. You must think that we don't rely on this, and that's why. So meitive. Now they're going to bring a question, though, a contradiction to this. He doesn't think there's ktiva. Wait. 13 שפרות היו במקדש, והיה כתוב עליהם, תקלן חדתים, תקלן עתיקים. This is the Mishnah I read before. The kinim, gozlei olah, eitzim, levona, zahav lechforet, shishalin, and shishalin nidavad. The other 6 are all for voluntary offerings. Taqlin chadatin, elu shkalim shal kol shana b'shana. This is all just a quote from the Mishnah. Those are the ones you bring every year. Taqlin atikim, mishalo shakal eshtikad yishkol shana ba. If I forgot to bring last year, I bring it again this year, but I don't put it in the regular kuppah for this year's stuff. I put it in a special kuppah and a special box. Kinim, hem tolim. These are, the kinim are for birds, the tolim, the turtle, I think they're turtle doves, and goes leola, hem b'nei ona. Those are the pigeons. Bikulan olot divrei Rabbi Yehuda. And all of them are for ola, right? They're all olot. Nothing is this ola and chatat. That's already what we discussed. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. And what do you see here? He also thought that you write on them. And, we have these separations. So, of course, he thinks that people pay attention to the writing. That can't be what the issue is. So, Ki'ata Rav Dimi Amar, Amre b'ma'arava, this mipnei ha'aravot must not be that we're worried the money's going to mix because people won't pay attention. It must be mishum zera mishum chatat shemetu ba'aleha. It's because we're worried that maybe somebody gave their money for a korban ola and chatat, and they died before the Kohen went and spent the money on the way it worked. In case you didn't learn shkalim, I'll explain to you. It's like I would have a baby. I bring my money, I put it in the kuppah there, and the Kohen would take the money. He would buy an offering for it, and he'd go sacrifice it. So now, what if I died in the interim? If I died, it's called a chatat shemetu ba'aleh. Now we know this is one of those chatat shemetot. Metot, it has to be left to die. Now in this case, it's just money, but it has to be destroyed. You can't use it for a sacrifice. Now the Kohen's going to take that money and go buy an offering. So we're going to be stuck with a problem if I died, because that money was supposed to go to be destroyed. Can't be used to buy an offering, and now it's going to be used for someone's offering, and it's a problem. So that's what he says. The reason is it's a different reason than we thought before. But wait, we're not worried that maybe this off chance that someone's going to die, which is funny. We have all these concerns. What if the Kohen Gadol dies in the middle of Yom Kippur, right? But they're basically saying you don't really have to worry in this case. If the sin offering is brought and the Baalim have already died, we don't worry about this. How do we know? It says in another Mishnah, if you send a korban chatat from abroad, you send money and say, please sacrifice this, the sin offering. They can sacrifice it, but they don't have to worry about the off chance that maybe you died. Oh no. We're worried that in a situation where we know that someone died, then we're going to be stuck. And since that situation might happen, we're not worried maybe someone died, but in the event that someone does die, we're going to be stuck. Why are we going to be stuck? Because now their money is mixed up with all these other people's monies, and we don't know whose money is who. Didn't have your name on it or anything. And then we're going to end up buying someone's sacrifice with money that's chatat shemetu ba'aleh and supposed to be destroyed. That'll be disqualified offering. So the Gemara suggests, v'nivur arba'a zuzeh v'nishteh b'maya v'hanach nishtalu. If you remember, we've learned about breira before, which is that you can determine something now and it'll be retroactively determined from before. So what if I just take, I don't know what money, or I'm the Kohen, let's say. I don't know what money this person who died put in, but I'll take 4 zuz, which is a value of one of these bird offerings for the sin offering. I'll take out 4 zuzim from the kuppah, and I'll throw it in the water, destroy it. And then the rest will be permitted because I'll say this retroactively will be determined that this was the money of the person who gave it for the sin offering and all is good. So why doesn't Rabbi Yehuda think that's okay? So they say, Rabbi Yehuda late breira, he doesn't hold by breira. Remember, this is all to discuss his issue with the shkalim. We're going to have to eventually, in tomorrow's daf, get back to what was his issue in our Mishnah. Why does he think you can't have these 2 kanim? Because we're not worried about ktiva. We'll get back to that later. So now they say, why by the shkalim? Does he disagree with Tanakam and think you can't have a sin offering in there? Because lele breira, he doesn't hold by breira. And now the Gemara is going to get off, and we're going to finish this tomorrow or start this tomorrow, which is, where do we get that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold by breira? So since he doesn't hold by breira, which we're going to have to explain, how do we know he doesn't hold by breira? Since there's no by breira, that's why there's no solution to this problem. In the event that someone actually dies, there will be no solution. And that's why we don't bother having a kuppah, one of these boxes, to put in money for sin offerings, because we might end up with a problem. With that, we will finish for today. Have a Shabbat Shalom or Shavua Tov to everyone.